Hey guys, imagine waking up to the rancid scent of fermenting meat and brackish seawater seeping through every crack in the hull. Welcome to life aboard a pirate ship. Before you get too cozy, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture yourself in the early 18th century, staring at barrels of damp biscuit so hard they could break a molar, alongside crumbled pork so greasy you'd slip off the deck if you tried to take a bite. That's right, pirates didn't dine on gold doubloons or sirloin steaks. They feasted on the maritime equivalent of stale gym socks. But here's the twist. These scurvy-ridden ne'er-do-wells somehow managed to preserve enough grub to keep their motley crew alive during months-long voyages. How did they do it? Strap in, because the answer lies in a swirling cauldron of salt, smoke, vinegar, and desperation. First off, let's talk about the most infamous staple, hardtack, affectionately, or not so affectionately, known as sea biscuit. These slabs of baked dough were little more than flour, water, and a pinch of salt, baked until they resembled the quay, weathered planks of the ship itself. Pirates cherished hardtack because it could survive storms, mutinies, and the occasional cannon blast without flinching. But what good is food if it's literally indestructible? Enter the art of reconstitution. Crew members learned to soften these bricks by dunking them in water, broth, or sometimes even rum, creating a porridge-like mush that, against all odds, tricked their stomachs into thinking they'd eaten something edible. Now, if hardtack symbolizes the bland backbone of pirate rations, salted meat was the muscle, often pork, sometimes beef, and occasionally fish. Here's the twisted science. After slaughter, the meat was hammered into wooden barrels and layered with coarse sea salt. Over weeks, the salt drew out moisture, creating an environment so deadly to bacteria that spoilage stood no chance. The result? A protein source that could last for months, albeit one that required a traveler's thirst in exchange for every chewy bite. Pirates would slice these salt slabs into thin strips and fry them in rancid oil, turning them into crispy, almost edible jerky. If the oil was too stale, they might boil the meat instead, yielding a greasy stew that stunk worse than a bilge pump. Next up, pickling, the sophisticated cousin of salting. Vegetables and fruits, when pirates could get their hands on them, were an elusive luxury. Fresh lemons and limes were prized for their scurvy-fighting vitamin C, but beyond that, most green matter was pickled in vinegar or brine. Think of barrels filled with cabbage, onions, or whatever root vegetables remained after a colonial raid. Over time, lactic acid bacteria would transform the produce into tangy pickles, preserving not only nutrients but also adding a welcome zing to an otherwise dreary diet. A bite of pickled onion was like a slap in the face from flavor itself, enough to momentarily distract your taste buds from the gnawing ache of malnutrition. But what about sweeter morsels? Pirates had an odd relationship with sugar. Molasses, that thick, dark syrup left over from refining sugar, was cheaper and more readily available than refined sugar itself. It was often boiled into a vile concoction called blackstrap, reserved for the lowest deckhands. Some pirates mixed it with water and a pinch of lime juice to create a rudimentary drink, but most of the time, molasses sat in barrels, fermenting slightly over months. The slight fermentation produced a bitter tang that, while foul, curbed the relentless tooth-grinding hunger aboard ship. Meantime, on calm nights when the sea breeze carried a hint of hope, pirates brewed their own beer from malted barley, water, and whatever herbs they could scrounge. This ship's beer was more than a morale booster. Fermentation killed pathogens in the water, making it safer than drinking straight seawater or stagnant freshwater. Yet, the beer came with its own caveat. The longer it fermented, the stronger, and more likely to induce delirium tremens. Its punch. A crew member who guzzled too much might just find himself dangling from the yardarm for daring to imagine a better life. Let's not forget the role of smoke. Smoking meat over smoldering oak chips imparted a layer of phenolic compounds that acted as a preservative. Pirate cookhouses, or rather whatever counted as a kitchen aboard a vessel rocking with every wave, had a small fire pit rigged to channel smoke into sealed compartments. Meat suspended above the coals would slowly absorb smoky flavor while losing moisture, creating a product both flavorful and long-lasting. The downside? The smoke stung the eyes, and sailors spent days coughing up blackened phlegm, which they believed was just a sign of robust health. If all these methods fail, pirates resorted to extreme measures: fermentation. Fish guts, heads, and fins discarded by merchant ships were prized by pirates for making a pungent fish sauce. This brew decomposed over weeks in barrels, offering a potent umami kick to otherwise monotonous meals. The smell? Think of rotten eggs, ammonia, and decomposing seaweed in horrific harmony. Yet a few drops of the sauce turned a bland porridge of boiled barley into something resembling a stew, albeit one that could clear the deck of any superstitious sailor. Throughout these methods, there was a common denominator: improvisation born of necessity. Pirates repurposed every barrel washed ashore, every scrap of sailcloth, and every pocket of brine they could find. When fresh meat was seized from captured vessels, they stuffed it into casks with a liberal helping of salt. If they captured a ship laden with spices, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, they'd guard those barrels as jealously as they did their cannons, using a pinch to mask the worst odors of decay. Yet, despite these ingenious techniques, scurvy remained the true scourge of pirate crews. No amount of hardtack or salted pork could supply vitamin C, and as months passed, men's gums would swell, limbs would ache, and some would die in agonizing misery. Only when a prize ship yielded fresh fruits or when a port town grudgingly traded citrus did relief come, often too late for many. The irony? The very pirates who reveled in chaos and bloodshed were undone by something as mundane as a lack of lemons. In the next segment, we'll explore how pirates managed spoilage at sea, how they tracked barrel rotations, rationed meager supplies, and coped with mutinous crewmates desperate to eat something other than brine-soaked bread. We'll dive deeper into the psychological torment of being trapped with fellow sea rats, all gripping their cutlasses and lamenting the next mouthful of misery. But for now, let this knowledge sit heavy in your mind. The pirates you imagine as swashbuckling heroes of the high seas were less romantic diners and more survivors of a floating nightmare, clinging to salt, smoke, and vinegar as though their lives depended on it, because in truth they did. The sun rose over the rolling swells as the black tempest's cook, an unhinged fellow named Barnaby Burnt Tongue O'Rourke, plucked a moldy loaf of hardtack from its barrel and hurled it at poor first mate Delgado, who hadn't eaten since last night's gruel. The hardtack bounced off Delgado's wooden leg with a satisfying thud, and the cook cackled like a loon. Welcome back to your daily nightmare, day 47 of our voyage, and the provisions are deteriorating faster than the captain's sanity. Barnaby's culinary delights began with the bilge water broth, an exquisite blend of sea scum, brine, and the occasional flotsam victim, a rather unintentional garnish. Many pirates would have scoffed, but as Delgado raised the ladle to his lips, his expression shifted from horror to desperate gratitude. After all, it was still technically liquid. Between sips, Delgado swore he spotted shrimp eggs hatching in the murk, but his stomach, ravaged by hunger, failed to complain. Meanwhile, in the lower hold, crates of pickled turnips were fermenting at a rate that bordered on alchemical chaos. The acidic fumes had etched patterns into the wooden beams, and rats, those insatiable stowaways, held nightly orgies in the barrels, turning simple root vegetables into rodent-infested paste. Crew members daring enough to retrieve a turnip discovered tiny whiskers and claws, leading to frantic scraping with their teeth and the occasional expletive. A culinary adventure, the cook proclaimed, featuring authentic rat broth. The irony was lost on no one, least of all the rats. Above deck, the salted pork department fared only slightly better. When the ship had first set sail, the pork barrels were lined in neat rows, each piece coated like a snowdrift in crystalline salt. But with time and jostling, the meat had coalesced into a single colossal slab dubbed the Brineberg. To carve off a slice, the crew had to employ crowbars, hatchets, and on one memorable occasion, an improvised saw made from a file and a length of rigging. The resulting shavings were boiled into a gelatinous horror that looked like translucent amber but tasted like despair, spiked with the salty tears of every pirate who dared to chew. Yet the true pièce de resistance was the fermented fish guts the cook had stumbled upon in a raided vessel's hold. Barrels labeled in a foreign tongue, later confirmed to read "warning abhorrent stench within," were dragged aboard with trembling hands. When Barnaby cracked the seal, a wave of fetid gas erupted, sending parrots screeching and sending the ship's cat into a fit of vertigo. Despite the overwhelming reek, Barnaby insisted on fashioning a fish sauce reduction, which he liberally doused onto every meager ration. "A dash of this," he proclaimed, "and your dinner will be alive with flavor." The crew, mouths burning with nasal regret, discovered that a teaspoon was quite enough to provoke dry heaves for hours. As the days stretched into weeks, the pirates developed ingenious, or insane, preservation workarounds. On calm seas, the cook constructed makeshift dehydration racks across the rigging. Strips of meat, fish, and even scraps of seaweed hung aloft, drying in the wind. The whistling breeze turned these morsels into brittle relics akin to leather, but with enough protein to stop the scurvy monster from gnawing at their joints. Unfortunately, seabirds found the racks irresistible. Crewmen spent each dawn on precarious yardarms, swatting gulls with oars and cursing the gods of preservation for instilling wings in wildlife. Then came the vinegar crisis. The Black Tempest had captured a merchant ship with crates of superior white vinegar, which, for a while, promised to save their wilted vegetables. But vinegar is finite, and after a fortnight of pickling every last cabbage leaf, the barrels ran dry. Desperate, the cook attempted to ferment a new batch from musty wine left in broken amphorae. What emerged was a putrid slosh that peeled paint and blistered tongues. Still, under duress, barrels of vinegary sludge were lined beneath every batch of pickles, because when life hands you rotten wine, you pickle your sorrows. Rationing became an art form. The quartermaster, an ex-novice schoolmaster named Alistair Finch, devised meticulous schedules dictating how many morsels each pirate could consume per tide cycle. Meals were measured by morsel, grains counted by single gilded beads, and salt allocations monitored with draconian precision. Transgressions, such as a butt of pineapples slipping into a single buccaneer's hammock, were met with swift justice, a dunking in the fish sauce vat, followed by a parade of mockery across the deck. As morale plummeted, Finch's ledger swelled with infractions. Lieutenant Briggs caught chewing a seasoning twig, penalty 3 days of bilge scrub. Even the parrots seemed to lament the loss of edible dignity. Disease, too, preyed upon the crew. Infections from maggot-infested wounds, digestive riots from bad gruel, and outbreaks of dysentery earned the lower decks a new nickname, the Sick Bay of Horrors. An old sea dog named Grimaldi attempted to administer herbal remedies, knotgrass tea for digestion, nettle poultices for inflammation, but the herbs were wilted, rancid, or outright poisonous. One night, after a misjudged poultice of foxglove turned 3 sailors' pulses into trilling banshee beats, the crew determined that the only real cure was to either reach port or embrace entropy. Amid this gastronomic chaos, interpersonal tensions soared. Mutiny rumors swirled whenever the cook refused to share his secret spice, a pinch of stale peppercorns. The captain, a lean brute named Captain Blackwood, survived solely on vinegar-drenched hardtack and a superstition that eating fresh fruit would anger the sea gods. His nightmares featured tendrils of mold invading his quarters, whispering of the moment his last shred of hope would rot away. The crew teased him mercilessly, calling him Lemonless One, until he threatened to keel-haul the ringleader, a cheeky lad called Red Jack. When they finally sighted land, a speck of lush greenery on the horizon, the sight of coconut palms and banana bunches seemed like the gates of paradise. But the jubilation proved premature. The island belonged to a Spanish colony, heavily fortified and suspicious of ragtag pirates skulking ashore with rusted cutlasses. While Captain Blackwood negotiated a dubious truce, the crew raided the shoreline for edible treasures, coconuts, wild yams, even tubers that looked suspiciously like poisonous toads. Several pirates collapsed after munching carelessly. One had to be hauled back to the ship clutching his entrails, a cautionary tale of culinary hubris. Back aboard, the rescued supplies revived the crew, temporarily. Fresh coconuts yielded water that tasted as sweet as salvation itself, and roasted yams soothed their gnawing guts. Yet the island's gifts dwindled within days, and the crew remembered that the sea cares nothing for fleeting reprieves. As they hoisted anchor, Delgado remarked that he'd never been more grateful to taste moldy biscuit again. The cook, glancing at his dwindling stores, almost wept with relief. By the end of Part 2, the pirates had learned 3 brutal lessons. First, that the sea will defeat any preservation method given enough time. Second, that desperation breeds innovation and insanity in equal measure. And third, that the promise of fresh food is the cruelest illusion of all. In the next chapter, we'll witness their darkest hour, a tempest that batters provisions into mush, a crew teetering on mutiny's edge, and a miraculous discovery lurking in the bilge that could save or doom the Black Tempest forever. Stay tuned, if you dare, to witness how these scurvy-riddled desperados cling to salt, smoke, and their stubborn will to survive. The Black Tempest had scarcely cleared the shores of that ill-fated island when the sky darkened as though the heavens themselves had soured on piracy. The first gusts hit like a battering ram, slamming waves against the hull and sending barrels of half-rotten turnips toppling into the bilge. The rancid sludge seeped through every plank, mingling with the salty brine and mutating into a foul potion that no mortal stomach could withstand. Below deck, crewmen scrambled to salvage what they could, scooping precious pickles into hastily lashed hammocks, their faces pale with panic. As rain lashed the deck, Barnaby Burnt-Tongue O'Rourke staggered forward, clutching a dripping barrel of salted pork. He raised it aloft, shouting, "Hold fast, ye mongrels! This slab of despair is the only thing keeping your bellies from gnawing your own bones." He heaved it over the rail, only for it to skid across the slick planks and shatter against the forecastle, salt crystals spraying like deadly shrapnel. A collective groan rose from the crew, another month's worth of rations gone in a single watery calamity. Down in the cargo hold, First Mate Delgado lit a lantern and surveyed the carnage. Casks of molasses had burst, their viscous black gold dripping into the bilge. Barrels of sea biscuit floated like deranged icebergs, waterlogged and swollen. Even the prized Brineberg had cracked, revealing a core of pork so damp it sloshed when prodded. Delgado ducked as a glob of preserved fish guts splattered overhead, the stench nearly knocking him senseless. He slammed the hatch shut and bellowed orders to rig up tarpaulins, but with the wind howling and the ship pitching, every line bit into calloused hands until they bled. By dawn, the deck was slick with rancid brine and the crew was listless, their nerves frayed as the storm raged on. Captain Blackwood, hair plastered to his skull like seaweed, paced the quarterdeck, muttering prayers to deities he'd never respected until his bottom lip quivered with desperation. "We cannot endure much more of this," he rasped. "Our stores are nearly spent, and the men grow as weak as drowned rats." He paused, scanning the horizon through rain-gummed spyglass. "If we survive the storm, we must find land, and fast." A week later, the tempest finally spent its fury, leaving the Black Tempest a maelstrom of soggy wreckage and salt-corroded gear. The crew emerged from below deck like creatures from a tomb, eyes hollow, limbs trembling. They scoured the shattered hold for anything edible. A handful of caked salt, a soggy scrap of bacon, even a cluster of barnacles scraped from the hull. Coleman, the ship's carpenter, pried them free with his chisels and offered them around like precious gemstones, but the honor of consuming crustacean shell and algae-infested mollusk was more insult than sustenance. Yet starvation sharpens the mind. Delgado, whose wooden leg had taken flare from a cannon blast years before, convened the surviving officers in the dim glow of the pilot's cabin. "We have 3 days of water, enough to wash down a thimbleful of gruel," he announced. "Provisions? Practically nothing. If we make landfall, we'll have to supplement with whatever grows, or crawls, ashore. Suggestions?" A heavy silence followed, broken only by the drip of seawater from the ceiling. Barnaby spoke first. "There's a small patch of seaweed I spotted on the stern. Kelp of some sort, could be boiled into something drinkable." The others exchanged grim looks. Seaweed soup sounded as appealing as bilge water broth. Next, Finch the quartermaster unfurled his battered ledger. "We could ration 1 barnacle per man, per meal," he ventured. "If we harvest them carefully from the submerged hull, we might eke out 3 more days." He looked up at Captain Blackwood, whose expression was as hard as a cannonball. "But we'd better find land before the men resort to gnawing each other's limbs." That night, under a sky streaked with phosphorescent waves, the crew bungeed tarred bags of seaweed to the bow, praying the plant matter would remain intact through another storm. In the hold, they filled empty rum barrels with collected rainwater, hoping to filter out the worst impurities by letting solids settle overnight. A makeshift distillation rig, copper piping scavenged from the galley, yielded a few cups of murky water, enough to dull the edge of thirst. When the new day dawned, land loomed, a rocky atoll ringed by treacherous reefs. Shouts of relief scattered as longboats were lowered, but as the crew scrambled ashore, they discovered that nature's pantry was just as deadly as the sea. The sandy flats were strewn with spiky sea urchins, their innards prized for a creamy texture, but lethal if handled improperly. Captain Blackwood, his boots caked in red algae, knelt and pried one free, then asked Delgado to slice open its carapace. The mate did so with a cutlass, severing a nerve cluster that sent a jolt through his hand. Yet the orange gonads gleamed like treasure, so they collected a dozen, hoping to supplement their dying bellies. Further inland, clusters of fern-like plants burst with bulbous roots. Coleman tasted one, bitter, chalky, but Delgado declared it edible after hours of boiling in seawater and dumping off the initial scum. The result was a starchy mash, punctuated by gristle and grit. It was sustenance, if barely. Meanwhile, Finch barked orders. Half the men harvest urchins, the other half crack open coconuts. They found a palm grove giving up its fruit grudgingly, and within hours the crew had cracked enough nuts to yield a pint of milk each. Luxury in the extreme. They spent the afternoon sipping coconut water, each mouthful a balm to wounds they didn't realize they'd carried. That night, around a roaring fire fed by driftwood, they tried their urchin roe, sautéed in coconut oil and sprinkled with the last of the ship's peppercorns. The taste was briny, metallic, almost alien, but one by one the pirates chewed and swallowed, the protein knocking the edge off their starvation madness. When the embers died, they collapsed into makeshift hammocks, bellies grumbling, bones aching, but alive. The respite was brief. As dawn broke, they discovered the tide had swept away their longboats, leaving them stranded. Panic flickered across faces hardened by years of raiding. Captain Blackwood stamped a boot. "We cannot wait for rescue. We'll rebuild a vessel from wreckage, driftwood, stolen rigging, and whatever sails remain. Then we return to the Tempest and pray she survived." Over the next week, the strand served as a cruel classroom in survival. They lashed logs into rafts, weaving tattered sails from patched sails and sailcloth. Barnaby and Delgado rigged a kettle over a fire ring of stones, boiling brackish water through layers of seaweed to purify it, an imperfect system that still left grit in every sip. Coleman carved rudimentary oars from hardwood stumps, his muscles straining as he worked. All the while, Finch rationed the last caches of coconut milk and urchin roe, marking consumption with tally marks in the sand. One night, Delgado slipped into delirium, haunted by visions of the Breinberg dissolving into the sea. He wandered the beach, mumbling about salt crystals and rattling his peg leg as if demanding justice. A crewman found him hunched over a tide pool, drinking its slimy water. Delgado looked up, eyes glassy, and whispered, "Better than nothing." They led him back to camp, where he collapsed into sleep, limbs twitching with dehydration convulsions. At last, the rafts were complete, 2 crude vessels rigged with jury-rigged sails and oars. They launched at dawn, leaving behind makeshift graves marked by driftwood crosses for those who'd succumbed to exposure or poison on the atoll. Boarding the rafts, they burned the empty coconut shells as a farewell pyre to their lost comrades, the smoke curling into a sky already clearing of storm clouds. The open sea welcomed them with placid swells, but the struggle was far from over. Each swing of the oar was a battle against exhaustion, every breath a prayer for fresh provisions. They shared a ration of seaweed broth at midday, black, viscous, and tinged with the ghost of hardtack. Yet they rowed on, driven by the faint hope of reclaiming the Black Tempest and its remaining stores. On the 3rd day adrift, delirium set in. A sailor named McCoy, his muscles wasted to skin and bone, collapsed and refused to row. Finch looked at him with the cold precision of a schoolmaster. "If you cannot pull, you do not eat." McCoy's eyes filled with tears, but he picked up an oar, croaking, "I'd rather drift to my death than starve here." His effort was halting, but kept pace, momentarily restored by duty, fear, or shame. It was late on the fourth day when a lookout cried out, "Sails!" Dead ahead. Frail masts and tattered canvas loomed on the horizon, a derelict merchantman drifting without crew. Captain Blackwood laughed hoarsely, a sound half prayer, half curse. Steering the raft alongside, they found the deck deserted, but below they discovered a trove of untouched provisions, barrels of salted beef, crates of ship's biscuits, and, miracle of miracles, a cache of fresh lemons stashed for the merchant. Captain's pleasure. They celebrated with silent tears, prying open lemons and dividing wedges between cracked lips. The citrus juice, acidic and fiery, burned but revitalized, washing away the taste of brine and decay from their mouths. Next to the lemons lay barrels of porter and jars of pickled cabbage, gifts from a sea god or a fortunate collision of drift currents. Barnaby arranged a feast on the deck, slices of salted beef fried in coconut oil, washed down with porter soured by time but still potent. As they hoisted sail on the merchantman, renaming her temporarily Second Chance, the crew felt a cautious hope coil in their chests. They had survived tempest and mutiny, rat-infested barrels and island poison, hunger that gnawed at bones and madness that whispered in dreams. Now, with provisions restored, they could steer the Second Chance back to the Black Tempest, salvage what remained, and finally make landfall in a friendly port. Yet even as the wind filled the patched sails, Delgado eyed the horizon with grim caution. "We're not out of the storm yet," he muttered. "Supplies can spoil, and storms can come again. And what of the men's spirits, frayed as they are? One more blow, and we may find ourselves chewing the leather from our boots just to survive." So ends part 3 of our Odyssey, dear viewers. Our heroes, ragged but unbroken, clutching newfound bounty as though it were a miracle. But pearls of hope often conceal razor-sharp edges. In the final chapter, we'll witness whether the Black Tempest, abandoned to the sea in time, can be reborn, whether the crew's battered bonds can withstand the siren call of mutiny when provisions sour once more, and whether a single lemon can truly banish the demons of scurvy and despair. Prepare yourselves, for the grand finale will be a bitter feast of redemption, or ruin. The dawn broke in a wash of blood-red light, illuminating the Second Chance's patched sails as they strained against a gentle breeze. Captain Blackwood stood at the helm, knuckles white, watching the horizon for any sign of the ghostly silhouette he'd called home. Behind him, the crew moved like shadows, hollow-eyed but still alive, still hungry for salty vengeance or at least a decent meal. They had reclaimed provisions, battered bodies, and a fragile sliver of hope. Now they needed one final act of daring, to rescue the Black Tempest itself. Below deck, Delgado inspected the lemons as though they were priceless jewels. Each golden wedge promised relief from scurvy's iron grip, yet he knew too well that health could crumble as quickly as hardtack. He bit into a lemon slice, the acid screaming on his tongue, and let its fire spread through his veins. It was medicine, ritual, and celebration all at once. "Gentlemen," he croaked to the gathered officers, "we've earned this, but mark my words, spoil those lemons with greed, and you'll face a fate worse than death. My unending lecture about proper ration etiquette." At midday, the Second Chance drew alongside the Black Tempest, its broken mast dripping seaweed, its hull scarred by barnacle armor. A bitter wind rattled the timbers as the pirate crew hustled across cleverly rigged gangplanks. They found the decks surprisingly intact. No signs of boarding parties, no evidence of plunder beyond what the sea itself had eaten. Inside, however, the hold was a tragedy in miniature. Waterlogged barrels, mold blossoming like evil flowers, and more rats than the original crew had ever seen. Barnaby, burnt-tongue O'Rourke, surveyed the carnage with a world-weary sigh. "Right," he said, wiping brine from his brow. "Let's see what we can salvage without tasting death." He pried open the first barrel, a once proud chest of salted beef, and recoiled as a gray sludge sloshed over his boots. "Keep moving," he snarled, "or we'll drown ourselves in the stink." Under Delgado's direction, the officers led salvage crews to triage edible goods. Lemons and porter went immediately into the Second Chance's hold. Barrels of molasses that had miraculously survived were loaded next, followed by crates of pickled cabbage, miracles in themselves. Even soggy hardtack, once dismissed as culinary punishment, was swept up and bundled for reuse. It could still be dried in the sun or mixed into gruel. What remained, the truly rotten, the blackened, the festering, was consigned to the sea for the ocean to reclaim. Yet despite the bounty, a pall hung over the crew. Each victory felt shadowed by the specter of future hunger. Captain Blackwood wandered the decks at dusk, brushing a finger along the blistered wood, as if expecting it to whisper when the next storm would come. He muttered prayers to forgotten gods, promised offerings of fresh fruit whenever they reached land, and swore on the devil's own compass that he would never again underestimate the sea's appetite. That night, a feast was laid out on the quarterdeck. Salted beef seared in coconut oil, pickled cabbage crisped into savory fritters, mugs of porter warmed by lantern light, and slices of lemon to garnish each plate. The crew gathered, elbows nearly touching in the cramped space, hollow bellies aching in unison. First Mott Delgado rose, a lemon wedge balanced comically on his nose. "To life," he said, "to survival, and to the fools who think they can best the sea." He tossed the wedge into his mouth, and the crew roared, brandishing mugs like weapons. The night rang with laughter, harsh, desperate, but genuine. For once, hunger was a memory, and fear retreated into the dark corners of the ship's timbers. But festivity has a short fuse at sea. On the edge of dawn, a cold wind whipped through the rigging, bringing the taste of salt and dread. A lookout shouted, "Sails on the starboard bow!" Eyes squinted into the gray horizon, where a merchant brigantine loomed, her banners snapping in the wind. She was unarmed, clearly laden with trade goods. The captain's grin split his weathered face. "Jackpot," he rasped. "Let's see what she's hiding." They approached under a flag of truce, the second chance's gun stowed to avoid alarming any potential hostages, or worse, armed resistance. But as they drew closer, Delgado's hand went to his cutlass. Something was off. The brigantine rode low in the water, sails half furled, crew conspicuously absent from deck. The sense of foreboding grew. The captain barked orders for a boarding party, and Delgado led the way, heart pounding. Below deck, the brigantine's hold was a tomb. Stacked crates of salted fish and barrels of flour formed a macabre staircase to the cargo master's cabin, where overturned chairs and dried blood told of hasty violence. Delgado's stomach turned as he spotted mangled bodies, merchants and sailors left to die from some unseen horror. A pungent smell of rot and chlorine drifted through the air. "They tried to preserve, but something went terribly wrong," he muttered. On the main deck, the second chance's crew found tangled rigging and splintered railings, as if smashed by a monstrous wave. But the real threat was invisible. Foam clung to every surface, a residue of a chemical preservative gone berserk. Delgado remembered reading about experimental preservatives, chlorine-based washes meant to keep fish longer but lethal if mishandled. It seemed the brigantine's captain had gambled on a new preservation technique, only to see it unleash madness upon his ship. Captain Blackwood frowned as he surveyed the scene. "A cautionary tale," he said quietly, "of swapping salt and smoke for science you cannot master." He ordered the brigantine's hold sealed and marked on the chart as cursed. Still, pockets of useful goods remained. Drums of cork for barrel staves, coils of rope, even a handful of intact floorboards. It wasn't much, but every scrap meant a better chance for the Black Tempest to refit. Back on the second chance, the officers convened in the chart room, lit by a single lantern. The maps spread before them looked less like navigation tools and more like a testament to their suffering. Routes marked with skulls where storms had nearly drowned them, islands scrawled in red that held poison and peril. Captain Blackwood tapped a finger on a small atoll far to the north. "We set course for Morning's End," he declared. "There lies our answer, a hidden cove where friendly smugglers wait. They'll have fresh water, barrels to recoup, and perhaps a safe harbor to refit the Black Tempest." A tremor ran through the men at the mention of Morning's End, a name whispered among pirate crews as both salvation and grave. But they'd come too far to shrink now. They nodded, shoving aside memories of rat-infested turnips and fish sauce nightmares for the hope of tropical fruits and firm steak. The voyage north was slow. Winds were fickle, as though the sea itself tested their resolve. Every day, the crew performed maintenance, battening down seams, securing barrels, and salvaging more materials from the brigantine's hull. Finch meticulously logged each ration, ensuring that lemons wouldn't be squandered and that water purification continued in the makeshift stills. Morale began to rise. Fresh showers of rain, clean and sweet, fell one evening, and the crew danced on deck, spinning beneath the downpour like sea gypsies reborn. Barnaby roasted handfuls of salted pork over coals, and Delgado led impromptu shanties that echoed off the waves. The second chance felt less like a prison and more like a vessel of second berths. Finally, on the 17th day of their trek, the spires of Morning's End rose from the mist, a cluster of jagged rocks crowned with dense jungle, surrounding a hidden lagoon with turquoise waters. Captain Blackwood's eyes gleamed as they slipped through the reef into the sheltered bay. Smoke curled from a hidden beach shack, and the faint clang of hammers drifted on the air. They had arrived. A small gang of smugglers greeted them, shifty fellows with broad smiles and sharper knives, but bound by profit and mutual need. They helped unload the salvaged supplies, fresh springs of water tapped from an underground stream, wineskins of palm wine for trade, and barrels ready for refilling. The smugglers' carpenters measured the hull of the Black Tempest and began planning repairs, carving new planks and fashioning replacement mats. As planks were replaced and sails patched, the crew worked alongside the smugglers, swapping sea stories and rations. Lemons were zest for the first time in months, tossed into fresh fish stews that sparked gasps of pleasure. The preserved foods that had sustained them now seemed relics, tributes to their endurance rather than staples of survival. One evening, as the sun painted the lagoon in molten gold, Captain Blackwood stood before his crew. The Black Tempest, reborn, floated proudly in the harbor, her hull gleaming with new wood. "We set out to plunder," he began, voice rough with emotion, "but found something more precious, our will to endure. We have tasted the darkest nightmares of hunger and lived to tell the tale. Tonight, we feast as free men, on fresh bread, roasted meat, and fruit kissed by the sun." The feast that followed was nothing short of legendary. Tables groaned under the weight of roast boar, tropical fruits bursting with juice, barrels of rum so fragrant they smelled like paradise. Laughter and music filled the cove as pirates and smugglers danced around bonfires. Labels of past horrors burned in effigy upon driftwood stakes. Delgado raised a goblet of palm wine. To salt, smoke, and vinegar, our teachers in misery. But now to lemons, fresh fish, and unending horizons ahead. The crew cheered, sloshing wine and rum across the sand. Under a sky tattooed with stars, they celebrated their survival. Bodily scars forgotten, rations measured only by memory. Fear drowned in waves of drink. The Black Tempest, once a vessel of despair, now stood as a monument to pirate resilience. Its hold, restocked with cured meats and citrus, brimmed with hope. Its sails, stitched by calloused hands, promised swift voyages to untold treasures. In the hush that followed the revelry, Captain Blackwood stood at the water's edge, watching the flicker of lanterns across the bay. He knew the sea's appetite was insatiable, that storms would rage and scurvy would lurk on distant horizons, but he also knew that the pirate code demanded defiance in the face of nature's cruelty. And so, with a final nod to the moonlit waters, he whispered, "Let the sea come. We are ready." Thus concludes the saga of how pirates preserved, and nearly lost, their sanity and their lives aboard ships that bristled with salt, smoke, and vinegar. From moldy hardtack to fermented fish sauce, from island poison to miraculous lemons, they endured a floating nightmare and emerged triumphant. Remember this the next time you gripe about stale snacks or flat soda. Somewhere in the age of sail, a pirate crew measured every morsel against madness and lived to feast again. And if you ever find yourself adrift on the waves of despair, just recall the Black Tempest's crew, who turned rancid ruin into roasted boar under the tropical sun, and know that survival, like the ocean, is a mighty and often absurd adventure. Imagine your throat burning, only it's not fire, it's salt water. Every gulp of seawater feels like swallowing shards of glass, yet the deck beneath you is slick with rum. You're a pirate, and your only salvation isn't water at all, but the fiery nectar of the Caribbean's finest, because on the high seas, water will kill you faster than any cannonball. Ahoy, mates! Let's set sail into part 1 of our riotous and mildly terrifying tale of why pirates guzzled more booze than brine. From the moment a vessel creaked free of port, fresh water became the rarest treasure aboard. Casks of clear spring water, once full, were gradually replaced by barrels of rum, brandy, and beer. Sailors discovered that water collected in wooden casks would sour, breed algae, and harbor deadly microbes faster than a cutthroat could shout "avast." Worse yet, hauling enough fresh water to satisfy 100 swashbuckling throats was a logistical nightmare. Barrels took precious hold space, grew heavy, and threatened to break free when the ship pitched. Rum stood tall as the undisputed champion of hydration at sea. Distilled from sugarcane molasses in the Caribbean colonies, it was cheap, potent, and slightly antiseptic. A measure of rum mixed with a little fresh water, when available, could stave off infection in a cut or soothe a sailor's gastrointestinal revolt from salt-soaked hardtack. Even in its pure form, rum's alcohol content killed off rogue bacteria in stagnant cask water, rendering it marginally safer than drinking straight from a saltwater-soaked deck plank. But why beer? Well, it turns out that medieval brewing wisdom collided beautifully with pirate necessity. Ship's beer, weak by landlubber standards but still clocking in around 3 to 4% ABV, was brewed aboard or procured in port. The boiling of water during the mash killed pathogens, and the resulting brew offered calories and a morale boost. A stout pint could fortify a sailor's resolve against scurvy's creeping curse and lend a pleasant buzz to ease the interminable monotony of watch duty. Still, sailors needed their daily ration of alcohol carefully measured. The grog ration, instituted by Admiral Vernon in 1740, became gospel. Half a pint of rum per man, cut with 2 parts water and a dash of lime juice. Not only did the lime juice hint at preventing scurvy, but it also masked the foul taste of stagnant water. Over time, grog became as synonymous with seafaring as parrot on the shoulder or peg leg in the boarding party. Of course, any rigid system invites mutiny, and pirates were nothing if not innovators of insubordination. Quartermasters would dilute grog until it resembled paint thinner. Captains smuggled extra barrels of brandy below decks for dinner parties. Enterprising crew would substitute seawater for fresh when no one was looking, only to discover their mates had learned the difference the hard way. A few unfortunate souls attempted to drink seawater for a shortcut to hydration, only to swell like baked potatoes, succumb to salt poisoning, and earn an unsavory nickname among the crew. As voyages stretched on from weeks into months, the cure-all virtues of alcohol took on legendary status. Facing scurvy, dysentery, and the ever-looming threat of pirate-hunting frigates, a sailor would gladly sacrifice sobriety for survival. Broken bones could be set with a swig of brandy. Dysentery sufferers were dunked in rum baths. Even parched throats praised the sweet burn of whiskey when water barrels ran bone dry. In a terrifying twist, doctors aboard warships, rudimentary though they were, prescribed daily doses of wine or brandy to convalescing patients, believing the alcohol stimulated the appetite and killed off germs. Yet not all spirits were created equal. Spice rum, soaked with clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg, was prized by pirates for its soothing effect on queasy stomachs and its uncanny ability to mask the flavor of anything from spoiled shark meat to fermented tar. Meanwhile, poor souls relegated to Kill Devil, a harsh blackstrap rum so vile it could peel flesh off a cutlass, drank it out of necessity rather than pleasure, their tongues calloused against its acidic fury. In the midst of this intoxicating chaos, certain rituals emerged. Friday nights became grog gala, when the cook's galley dispensed the week's final ration in a communal barrel. Stories grew wilder as the night progressed. The kraken that dragged men into the deep, the phantom ship with glowing green sails, or the curse of Blackbeard's ghost. Alcohol lubricated the engines of tall tales, forging camaraderie even as it sowed seeds of recklessness. Yet dependence on booze carried its own horror show. Pirates returned to port with liver complaints, blackouts, and brawls over the last drop. Some spent fortunes in every tavern from Port Royal to Tortuga, trading gold for drink until creditors sent mercenaries to drag them back to their ships. Others tried to temper their grog with water and lemon, only to be ridiculed by shipmates as lime lushers for their perceived cowardice. Through it all, one truth endured. At sea, water would betray you. It soured, salted, and stank of mildew and shipworm detritus. But alcohol, properly mixed, moderately rationed, and wisely spiced, offered sailors a semblance of safety and a fleeting escape from the tyranny of salt and sweat. It was a liquid lifeline, a daily indulgence, and sometimes the only thing standing between a pirate and the watery abyss. In Part 2, we'll reveal the scandalous recipes pirates concocted to stretch their rum further, the ecclesiastical debates over grog taxation, and the dark legend of a cursed barrel that drove an entire crew mad. We'll dive into portside hijinks, slurred duels, and the bizarre medicinal tonics that blurred the line between cure and curse. Keep your mugs ready and prepare for more absurdity from the golden age of inebriation. Part 2. Scandalous recipes, groggish schemes, and cursed barrels. Let's dive headfirst into the smoky taverns and sun-bleached decks where pirate ingenuity and utter lunacy combine to keep grog flowing and pockets empty. By this point, you've witnessed the humble origins of the infamous grog ration. But pirates don't simply gulp down standard-issue naval swill. Oh no, matey, they concocted scandalous recipes to stretch every drop, dodging both dry rot and Captain Vernon's wrath. 1. The infamous gargle and guzzle. You thought grog was bad? Try the pirate invention dubbed gargle and guzzle. First, swirl a thimble of brandy in your mouth to numb your gums. Then add a ladle of diluted vinegar, left over from pickling turnips, to mask the brandy's burn. Finally, chase it with a mouthful of rancid beer. The result, an odorous cocktail that tasted like wet leather left in a midden heap, but by Jolly Roger's beard, it made a single barrel last an extra half day. Word spread so fast that even plantation overseers tried to flog it to indentured servants, who promptly revolted for better fare. Dusra, tar-infused tipple, when fresh pine resin from plank repairs mixed with errant drops of rum. Ingenious deck rats, pirates, used it as a sealant, but a few swindlers realized that by carefully skimming resin lumps and dissolving them in warm rum, they could produce a glowing amber liqueur. This tar-infused tipple glittered under lantern light, and even the most hardened sea dog mistook it for a rare Madeira. Too bad one sip triggered hallucinations of barnacles chanting sea shanties. Several poor souls spent 3 nights crawling the deck, convinced they'd grown coral horns. 3. Coconut cream. Conspiracy. Coconuts saved lives. Remember Part 1. And their meat could be rendered into creamy coconut milk. Pirates discovered that a spoonful of coconut cream in rum created a silky, sweet brew dubbed the Coconut Cream Conspiracy. It tasted like tropical paradise, until the cream curdled in barrels at dawn, creating floating islands of sour dairy that struck fear into the hearts of cabin boys. Yet clever cooks added a stick of cinnamon raided from Spanish galleons, transforming curds into a faux eggnog that inspired raucous midnight dances and the occasional sugar-fueled mutiny. Nangavda, lime bolt elixir. Inspired by Admiralty health edicts, pirates began mixing fresh lime juice with rum rations. Some forward-thinking scallywags fortified the brew with cloves, allspice, and enough sugar to disguise the funk of caked-on bilge. The lime bolt elixir wasn't just a beverage, it was marketing. A placard above the galley might read, "Cures scurvy, cures boredom, cures hangovers, maybe." The truth? Sailors drank so much that the vitamin C overdose caused stomach cramps, earning the concoction the nickname Pirate Purgative. But desperate crews embraced it, better loose bowels than a slow death from rotting gums. Eindavda, the smuggler's midnight toddy. When pirates encountered smugglers in hidden coves, they traded fresh ginger root and honey in exchange for dark spirits. A few evenings later, in secret coves lit by torchlight, pirates learned the art of the midnight toddy. Warmed dark rum stirred with honey, grated ginger, and a scrap of citrus peel. It soothed feverish chills and inspired whispered tales of ghost ships. Soon, any fresh ginger was worth more than a chest of silver, though many a pirate returned with a belly full of worms after careless consumption of unpeeled roots. As the sun sets on these curious recipes, let's pry open the scandalous world of portside grog taxation and churchly condemnation. Groggy debate, alcohol, tax, and the church. In bustling port towns, from Port Royal to Nassau, pirates weren't shy about flaunting their liquid hoards. Governors, desperate to fill colonial coffers, slapped hefty taxes on imported spirits. Pirates recoiled, A single barrel of brandy could be taxed to the point that a pint cost more than a share of loot won in a naval skirmish. The solution? Moonlight smugglers loading grog into barrels hidden beneath ballast stones or disguising rum as olive oil. Local clergy, aghast at the public drunkenness and Sabbath day frolics, preached fiery sermons. Ye who foster fornication with liquor's poison shall writhe in eternal thirst. But pirates answered with a cheeky retort. One notorious captain, known only as Preacher's Bane, sent a barrel of spiced rum to the cathedral, addressed to the most hypocritical wine-sipper of Port Royal. Legend says the barrel exploded during the sermon, showering the congregation with sticky molasses and half-soaked cloves, the cursed barrel of Blackfin Bay. Every legend needs a spine-chilling twist, and pirates thrived on terror. Enter the tale of the cursed barrel of Blackfin Bay. During a fog-shrouded raid, a crew seized a barrel marked with strange symbols from a reclusive alchemist's storehouse. Its rum glowed an unholy green and whispered promises of eternal courage. Ignoring omens, the captain ordered its contents served. Survivors recounted that once the third mug was drained, shadows on the bulkhead slithered into monstrous shapes. Men tore at their hair, screaming of kraken's eyes and siren's claws. By dawn, the entire crew lay unconscious in pools of vomit, some never waking. The barrel was cast into the deepest trench, but each moonless night, boats hear a distant clinking and a ghostly voice beckoning. One more drop, just one more drop. Pirates shunned Blackfin Bay thereafter, engraving the location on every map as "Here lies fear." Portside antics, saloons, brawls, and booty for barrels. When pirate ships docked, saloons flocked to greet them, offering free rounds on bars if pirates pledged their swords to guard the establishment. Brawls erupted over spilled ale, overcharged tabs, and shameless flattery of wenches. A popular tavern game involved firing flintlock pistols at hanging casks, hoping to split them open and let the ale flow rivers onto the dusty floor, an act of glorious vandalism known as cascade. Each cracked barrel yielded months' worth of water, rations consumed in a single binge. In Nassau, pirates formed the world's first tipsy bazaar. Swordsmiths accepted grog as partial payment, surgeons stitched wounds in exchange for jugs of porter, and mapmakers drew treasure charts contingent on a barrel of wine. When supplies ran low, a pirate might auction a share of future plunder for a keg of brandy, forever indebted to one's own captain in the meanest of pirate mortgages. From grog to grognard, the aftermath. As years passed, the age of sail gave way to steam, and naval discipline tightened. Grog rations were standardized, limes replaced with synthetically derived vitamin C, and unlicensed spirits met swift hangings. Yet, the pirate legacy endured. Modern rum festivals celebrate Grog Day, where enthusiasts recreate tar-infused liqueurs and coconut concoctions. Historical reenactors don weathered coats, recite tall tales of cursed barrels, and pledge to keep alive the absurdity of a time when a ship's true lifeblood was not water, but the sweet, burning burn of alcohol. In Part 3, we'll explore the darkest scribbles of pirate ship logs to uncover the toll of seasickness, delirium tremens, and hangovers so ferocious they sparked battlefield surrenders. We'll reveal how a captain's own alcohol-fueled hallucination once altered the course of a major naval battle. Brace yourselves, because when pirates drank more alcohol than water, they didn't just survive, they redefined madness on the high seas. Picture this, you're slumped over the rail, puking salt water into a barrel of rum, convinced the horizon itself is tilting to steal your last drop. Your head pounds like a cannon salvo, and that's before you realize you've drunk 3 times your ration in desperation. Welcome to the true horror show of pirate life, when the only cure for seasickness was more spirits. The open ocean is a cruel master. For a greenhorn, the constant lurch of the ship induces a primal nausea that no handful of sea biscuits can allay. Pirates quickly learned that when fresh water turned to brine and beer soured into vinegar, the only thing left to steady a queasy stomach was a slug of high-proof rum. Thus began the vicious cycle. Drink to quell the waves, only to awaken with a hangover so fierce it felt like a boarding party assaulting your skull. First, seasickness and the spirit solution. Within days of setting sail, new recruits, landlubbers as they were cruelly dubbed, found themselves heaving over the gunwale. The cure-all, A dram of rum swallowed raw, its fiery burn momentarily eclipsing the heave of the hull. Seasoned pirates swore this practice was key. After one taste, the stomach forgets its revolt and concentrates on digesting the burn. Of course, the next morning brought a throbbing head and a parched throat, but by then the lesson was learned. Curse the waves and praise the bottle. Dusra. Hangovers so fierce, they sparked mutinies. A pirate's hangover was not a mere headache, it was a neurological siege. Descriptions and surviving ship logs speak of men so incapacitated that they lay on the deck, arms flung wide, muttering of roaring thunder inside their brains. When a captain demanded duty at dawn, his bleary-eyed crew sometimes refused, sparking the infamous Port Royal Revolt of 42, where 20 pirates refused to climb the rigging until their heads stopped rattling like empty cannon barrels. The quartermaster finally appeased them by distributing extra grog with a dollop of molasses, thus curing malcontents with the very medicine they despise. Third delirium. Tremens on the high seas. Extended voyages bred a darker specter, delirium tremens. Deprived of fresh rations and staggering under months of grog, some sailors began experiencing violent tremors, hallucinations of crawling insects across their skin, and a crushing terror that the ship's timbers would burst into flame. One chilling account from the brigantine Revenge's Wraith tells of boatswain Jebediah Glass Eye Crowley, who, in the grips of DTs, ran screaming into the hold, convinced the barrels had eyes and were plotting his demise. Only after fellow pirates wrestled him into the brig, forced damp sacks of seaweed over his hands to calm the shakes, and dosed him with stout beer did he return. Eyes hollow, vow fulfilled. Never again shall I curse water, nor embrace rum so blindly. Nangawade. The captain's vision, how one drunken dream changed a naval encounter. Perhaps the most astonishing tale of alcohol-induced hallucination occurred during the skirmish, known as the Battle of Bloodhook Shoals. Captain Eleanor Bloody Eye Brannan of the sloop Sable Serpent reportedly downed an extra measure of brandy before taking to her quarterdeck. Mid-battle, she ordered the colors struck and the sails trimmed to port, an inexplicable maneuver that had her crew convinced they were headed into an ambush. As her rivals closed in, her ship glided through an unexpected channel hidden by mist. One Brannan claimed she saw in a fever dream moments before. A narrow passage, walls of rock breathing mist lit by lantern light. The maneuver allowed the Serpent to escape with minimal damage while the pursuers ran aground. Historians call it the miracle of Bloodhook, but the captain insisted it was her rum-soaked vision, a hallucination born of delirium tremens and sheer desperation. Eindavde, medicinal myths in the grog doctor, pirate surgeons, if such a term can be applied to charlatans wielding rusty scalpels, often prescribed grog as medicine. Seasick pirates received rum toddies with grated ginger, dysentery patients were dunked in rum baths, infected wounds were doused in brandy to sterilize the flesh. Yet the real horror lay in dosage confusion. Sailors sometimes received entire bottles in place of measured drams. One notorious surgeon, Dr. Erasmus Madcap Finch, believed that delirium tremens could be cured by alcohol until he himself fell victim, wandering the decks at night, muttering about ghost ships offering another bottle. His final prescription before being jettisoned ashore was simply more rum, arawade, from cries of agony to shanties of bewilderment. As grog fueled both delirium and camaraderie, a new genre of sea shanty emerged, songs that began as dirges of misery and ended as ridiculous pains to inebriation. Refrains like, "Oh, my head's a storm-tossed reef," "My tongue, a brandy thief," echoed across the decks, a musical therapy to drown out the whispers of madness. These shanties bonded crews in shared agony, a communal acknowledgement that if alcohol was their curse, at least it was also their comfort. Yeram. The toll, beyond the deck. Pirates who survived months at sea returned to port, leaving behind broken minds as well as bodies. Many took up shore leave only to discover they could not stand sunlight without the world spinning, a condition now recognized as labyrinthitis, but then attributed to the rum's revenge. Families reported erratic behavior, former buccaneers barking, orders at their dinner tables flinching at the sight of a wooden chair leg, or attempting to steady the deck during storms of imagination in their parlors. This social fallout cemented the pirates' reputation as a demonic figure, cursed by their own thirst. 8. The decline of the grog age. By the late 18th century, naval authorities recognized the perils of unrestricted grog. Standardized rations, lime juice allocations, and the occasional substitution of tea marked a slow retreat from spirit-fueled salvation. Steamships carrying technology rather than sails offered freshwater condensers, ending the reliance on casks. But the romantic image of the rum-swilling pirate endured, immortalized in literature and song. Thus ends Part 3, a journey through the swirling fog of alcohol-fueled survival, delirium, and the unlikeliest naval tactic born of a drunken dream. In our final installment, Part 4, we'll witness the ultimate reckoning. When the supply of spirits ran dry, alliances shattered under the weight of withdrawal, and a single barrel of water became the most coveted prize on the seven seas. Stay tuned if your stomach can handle another tale of intoxicated madness. Imagine the deck as a desert and your worst enemy a wooden barrel. No rum, no respite, only parched throats and eyes burning with delirium. Welcome to the endgame, when the last drops of spirits vanish and water becomes the deadliest treasure of all. By now, we've witnessed pirates turn wine into medicine, brandy into menace, and casks into conduits of madness. But even the most potent grog can run dry. As voyages stretch beyond provisioning points, the barrels of rum and brandy empty, leaving a crew adrift between thirst and revolt. In this final chapter, we'll see spirits fade, alliances fray, and the simplest liquid, water, transform into a weapon more feared than any cutlass. First, when the last barrel shutters empty on the morning of the 30th day without a resupply, the quartermaster pounded a rusty nail into the empty rum barrel, the last one aboard the sloop Sea Serpent's spell. No cheers, just hollow silence. Faces gaunt, eyes sunken. Pirates realized they had squandered their lifeline. First, Mate Rowan tapped the barrel's bottom with a dagger. A hollow clank echoed like a death knell. Crew gathered, hands outstretched, only to curl into fists of rage. "We were promised fresh dock at Dead Man's Cay," one muttered. "Instead, we got thirst and betrayal." 2. The descent into alcohol withdrawal is no myth, it's a siege on the soul. Crews experienced tremors so violent that they shook sleep from hammocks. Hands trembled as they tried to braid rope. Lips tremored in futile curses. Insomnia stalked them, turning every night into an eternity. Ship logs recount how men scratched at imaginary bugs, lacerating arms, begging for just 1 dram. Chaplains' journals, rarely preserved, note 13 cases of delirious despair in a single day, each man raving that the horizon was a vat of rum he could almost taste. Moondrum. The water barrel. Conspiracy 1 barrel of water remained, slightly brackish but precious beyond measure. Captain Silas, 7 Seas McGraw, declared equitable shares, a dram for each man at sunrise and sunset, but fairness quickly dissolved in the stew of desperation. On the eve of the distribution, a secret faction led by boatswain Eli Thumbtack Hagen raided the water locker under cover of darkness, siphoning half the barrel into hidden kegs. When the ration rolled around, half the crew found their cups empty, sparking the infamous Black Cup Revolt. Men brandished cutlasses over a crate of biscuits, accusing each other of thievery, while the real pilferers watched in grim delight. Nangavda, blood on the deck. Over a barrel, the night the mutiny erupted, the scent of fear and salt mingled in the air. Sparks from lanterns danced on polished steel as pirate factions squared off around the water barrel. Rowan, the first mate, tried to quell the chaos with a pistol butt, but 1 blow cracked the barrel's seal. Fresh water gushed like a tidal wave, washing over feet and troughs. For a moment, the deck became a flooded arena. Men lunged to fill cups, others slipped and slashed at limbs. When the tide receded, 2 lay dead and 5 wounded. The rest drank in silence, guilt pooling heavier than the water itself. Eindavde, mercy and retribution, Captain McGraw emerged at dawn, surveying the carnage. He convened what remained of his officers and decreed a brutal compromise. Any man who brandished steel over water would face keelhaul or marooning. A public trial took place on the forecastle, where boatswain Hagen was found guilty, despite his claim of necessity. McGraw spared his life but ordered him to guard the next water cache on an uninhabited isle, a living exile. The message was clear: thirst is no excuse for murder. 6. Improvised rations and seaside salvation. With rum gone and water rationed to needlepoint precision, pirates turned to desperate measures. Rainwater catchment nets were rigged across the yards. Canvas was soaked at dawn to collect dew. Sails, spinnaker cloth, and even the captain's coat were repurposed. Each precious drop was funneled into casks, filtered through sailcloth, and boiled over makeshift braziers to kill pathogens. Meanwhile, fishing lines were baited with shreds of sail and old scraps of biscuit. Luck yielded small fish that were boiled into soups, flavored with the last dregs of salt and a scrap of dried seaweed. Yearam. The island of Hollow promises. On the 45th day, the lookout spotted a sliver of green. Isla de Sal, an island rumored among sailors as a haven of fresh springs. But legend carries a sting. The island's fresh water sources lay deep in a jungle infested with coral vipers and poison fruit trees. Landing parties hesitated, but thirst grew impossible to deny. Lo, the ship's carpenter volunteered to scout inland. He returned 3 days later, delirious and half-mad, clutching a clay jug, a trickle of fresh water. He warned of venomous fauna and venomous flora alike, declaring the island's lush promise a toxic mirage. Et davde. The final bargain, cornered between death by thirst and death by poison, Captain McGraw brokered a desperate deal. He would trade the ship's last few silver coins, worth a dozen barrels of rum in any port, for access to a hidden spring known only to a Sioux clan of native smugglers. The emissary, a young woman named Marisol, guided a clandestine landing under moonlight. Her price was odd: a jug of fresh water for each of her village's huts, plus 1 barrel of the crew's prized brandy stash, a treasure they no longer possessed. Yet McGraw honored the pact, offering empty casks as collateral and promising future trade. 9. Redemption at a price. Deep in a moonlit cavern, the crew drank from the spring. Each sip felt like absolution, washing away days of agony. But as Marisol watched the sea sinners with curious eyes, a lesson dawned. For every drop they drank, they owed the island's ecosystem a debt. The pirates vowed to return not as looters but as custodians, planting coconut palms, fishing responsibly, and offering rum barrels filled with salt for barter. In a twist of poetic justice, the pirates became stewards of the very resource they nearly killed themselves to possess. 10. Homeward bound. The end of the Graw. Era with thirst slaked and spirits shattered, the crew set sail for home. They carried fresh water in every barrel, depleted rum in just 2, and tales of misery worth more than any gold. The sea serpent spell reached port battered but wiser. Governors recorded new regulations limiting spirits on pirate ships, mandating water condensers, and appointing water wardens to enforce humane rations. On the quay, emaciated pirates stepped ashore, greeted by cheers and stunned silence. They collapsed into taverns, now stocked with ice houses and freshwater pumps, where they sipped lemonade and sang dirges of rum-soaked legends. In their eyes gleamed a sober gratitude. They had learned at the brink of madness that water is life's true elixir. Epilogue. The golden age of piracy faded, and with it, the era when rum reigned supreme. Steamships and desalination plants ended the grog ration's tyranny. Yet the legend endures. Tales of thirst-driven mutinies, water wars under cannon fire, and a pirate clan's pact to protect a hidden spring. Remember, when you toast with chilled vodka or craft beer, that somewhere, centuries ago, a pirate mutiny over a single barrel of water redrew the line between survival and savagery. And if you ever find yourself thirsty, spare a thought for those hollow-eyed buccaneers who risked everything for a sip of pure water, and discovered that even a pirate can learn mercy. Hey guys, imagine biting into a slab of salted pork so tough it could double as a ship's cleat. Welcome aboard the floating meat locker of the 17th century Caribbean. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture a pirate ship setting sail with a hold packed tight, barrels of pork, beef, fish, and sometimes the occasional exotic bird snatched from a tropical isle. No refrigeration, no modern ice, only age-old techniques, barrels, and the ceaseless churn of seawater. In this first part, we'll explore how sea dogs of legend turned simple cuts into preservation marvels, using salt, smoke, and smokehouse superstition. First, the salt cure. Brining the beast, salt was the pirate's most precious commodity, prized more than gold doubloons for its uncanny power to draw out moisture and stop bacterial invaders in their tracks. Upon slaughter, meat was rapidly cut into thick slabs and layered in wooden barrels, each layer buried under a hill of coarse sea salt. As days passed, osmosis worked its magic. Moisture seeped from the cells, replaced by salt crystals that desiccated the flesh. What emerged was a hardened brick-like slab of meat that could last months at sea. But it wasn't as simple as dumping salt into a tub. Pirates understood, through trial, error, and tragic stomach riots, that timing and technique mattered. Meat cured too briefly invited maggot infestations. Cured too long became so tough a cutlass was needed to shave off a nibble. Legends speak of quartermasters measuring brine ratios with pine nut scoops and relying on whispered lore. The salt had to be from certain shallow bays or risk imparting a bitter, metallic tang. Dusra, drying racks, harnessing sea breeze. When fair weather ruled the waves, crews transformed the rigging into makeshift drying yards. Strips of salted meat, known colloquially as salt jerky, were lashed to ropes high in the masts, where sun and salt-laden wind combined to dehydrate each strand. Tensioned sails prevented stray gulls from feasting, while the watchmen warded off rats with bell-bottomed boots and tirades of sailors' profanity. This method yielded a lean, leathery snack perfect for nibbling during watch duty. But the risk was real. Sudden storms could soak the racks, reintroducing moisture and sparking rapid spoilage. More than one pirate captain went to Davy Jones' locker after a gale crashed through the mast, drenching meat stores and unleashing a legion of maggots. Moondrom, smoking chambers, pirate smokehouses at sea. Perhaps the most flavorful and terrifying technique was smoking. Below deck, hidden within the bulwarks, cooks rigged iron grates over low embers of oak, hickory, or, when desperate, driftwood soaked in rum. Smoke infused the meat with phenolic compounds that not only deepened flavor, but produced a natural preservative barrier. The smoky cauldrons became crucibles of abdominal anguish, lungs filled with acrid fumes, eyes wept brine-tinged tears, and sailors emerged coughing black phlegm for days. Yet the payoff was staggering. Smoked strips known as sea bacon were prized for their tender chew, and the way they transformed dour sea biscuit into a hearty sandwich. Nangavda, acidic allies, vinegar and brine. Baths. When fresh fruit was captured from island raids, savvy pirates poured vinegar, derived from spoiled wine, over scraps of meat or fish in shallow basins. The acid slowed spoilage and added a sour zing to otherwise monotonous rations. These brine baths sometimes received aromatic boosts, peppercorns, bay leaves, and stolen cloves, creating a tangy marinade that both cured and flavored in one fell swoop. Yet acid was a fickle friend, too strong and the flesh turned mushy, too weak and maggots marched in triumph. Crew logs note fierce debates over vinegar strengths, often settled by burly mariners dunking a finger and daring each other to taste, sometimes with disastrous, blistering results. In our next part, we'll explore the darker arts, curing in pirate superstition, charms to ward off rot, secret alchemical recipes for preserving exotic birds and turtles, and how the fear of spoilage drove mutiny. Stay tuned for part 2 of our sardonic deep dive into the grotesque genius of meat preservation at sea. As the sun crept over the horizon, the crew of the Crimson Corsair scrambled below deck to inspect yesterday's experiment. A crate of turtle legs brined in sugarcane syrup and sealed with a dab of alchemist's sal ammoniac. No one dared breathe too deeply. Rumor held that this sweet cure might either preserve meat for a year or convulse a man into calling barnacles delicious little people. But necessity triumphed over superstition, so they pried open the crate with cutlasses, bracing themselves for either a feast or foul doom. The first hurdle in Part 2's odyssey of pirate meat preservation was superstition. Quartermasters swore by protective charms, amulets carved from whalebone, pouches of stagnant lagoon water, scraps of old sails stitched into meat sacks, each meant to ward off spoilage spirits. When a barrel of salted boar rattled ominously, some said they heard whispers from within. The captain's wife's grandmother's thimble was dropped inside to appease the meat wraith. If no groans followed, the quarters deemed safe, until the next eerie squeak. Next came alchemical recipes pilfered from Spanish galleons. A battered leather-bound tome instructed the infusion of zinc and copper filings into salt brine, supposedly to reinforce the meat's cellular walls against bacteria. Pirates called it the metal cure, and though many complained of a metallic aftertaste worse than the bilge, they refused to argue when the pork emerged free of maggots for 6 solid months. The real kicker? The spoonful of black tar, boiled from smoked ship's pitch, added a gloss that impressed visiting privateers who assumed the meat was crafted in noble smokehouses. Exotic birds and turtles demanded bespoke treatments. When a trading sloop offload yielded crates of songbirds captured in the Red Sea, the cook devised a 2-step process. First, the feathers were singed over flame to seal pores. Then the birds were plucked and dry cured with a mixture of pepper, crushed coral, and a handful of gunpowder. Gunpowder, they claimed, kept vermin at bay, though it also left the birds tasting faintly of cannon fire. Guests at impromptu deckside feasts often coughed through laughter as they chewed, marveling at the battle-ready flavor. Turtles, prized for their dense flesh and long shelf life, were butchered at dawn. Crews tossed these marine leviathans into open vats brimming with brackish water infused with citrus peel and scorpion fish oil. The acid from the peel tenderized the meat, while the fish oil created a rancid barrier, unsavory to scavengers but oddly reminiscent of mutton when fried. After days of slow simmering, the turtle meat was removed and hung on drying racks, where the sun and salt wind transformed it into a leathery jerky good for snacking during midnight watches. Pirates prized innovation, but sometimes paid a steep price. One infamous experiment involved burying meat in sand warmed by the ship's galley fire. The sand cure was meant to replicate desert preservation techniques, but a miscalculation sent the hold's temperature soaring. By nightfall, the sand-coffined hams began fermenting, releasing a stench so vile it nearly drove the cook mad. That barrel was jettisoned intact, rolling over the side with a thud that echoed like a dying beast. Preservation wasn't solely chemical or thermal, it was political. Alliances with island tribes often yielded secret cures. On the shores of Saint Croix, a delegation of Carib healers taught pirates to wrap meat in woven fig leaves, then placed it atop heated stones wrapped in banana fibers. The moist heat and mild tannins of the leaves slowed decay without drying the flesh to shoe leather. In return, pirates offered muskets and rum, and sometimes repatriated straggler parrots, creating a bizarre trade network of bird for beast and steel for stew. Yet for all these arcane methods, the greatest enemy remained moisture. Below deck, condensation dripped from iron nails onto barrels, seeding pockets of mildew that blossomed like evil fungi. Piratical carpenters drilled extra ventilation holes in barrel lids, lining them with fine mesh woven from sail fibers to admit air but repel insects. Some crews spread a dusting of charcoal atop barrel staves, believing it acted as a moisture sponge, an idea borrowed from ships' pump filters. The result was barrels that rattled with tiny black motes, each a grim reminder that good intentions sometimes led to charcoal-laced rations. As meat preservation mastery peaked, rationing became a dark art. Captains instituted daily meat shares, wherein each man received a sliver of salami-like sausage forged from pork scraps, fat trimmings, and fish oil paste. Any attempt to hoard extra shares led to swift and public confiscation. Offenders found their hammocks stuffed with moldy meat, punished by a stench so foul it left them teetering between asphyxiation and repentance. By the end of Part 2, the pirate crew had become both culinary alchemists and reluctant chemists, blending salt, smoke, acid, and superstition to stave off famine. But lurking beneath this ingenuity was the ever-present specter of revolt. A single barrel of spoiled meat could spark mutiny as swiftly as a missing share of grog. In our next installment, we'll confront the chaos that ensued when a full hold of cured meat turned rancid overnight. forcing pirates into savage meal scraps, desperate island raids, and a blind gamble on a carcass whispered to be blessed by a Vodun. Priest, stay with us, because on a pirate ship, the line between feast and famine is finer than a razor's edge. By dawn, the hold of the Red Tempest reeked of sulfur and decay. The 100 barrels of preserved mutton had turned traitor overnight. Rats skittered among bloated carcasses, their bellies distended with meat so rancid it sizzled under their teeth. Quartermaster Giles, face ashen, pried open the first barrel, only to recoil as a geyser of foul gas billowed forth, carrying with it the chorus of buzzing flies. A muttered curse rippled through the crew. When meat turns on its keepers, there's only one cure: revenge. Captain Voss convened his officers on the quarterdeck, while the decks below became a battleground of spoons and knives, as sailors scoured every scrap for anything salvageable. "We cannot feast on rot," Voss rasped, voice cracking like a whip. "We strike at dawn on Turtleback Cay. They have goats, they have fowl, and their governor fears nothing more than a bar of gold." The promise of fresh meat sharpened every eye. They would raid an island before hunger drove them to gnaw on their own boots. At first light, longboats sliced through calm water, oars churning with desperation. The island rose like a mirage, white cliffs crowned with palms, goats grazing heedlessly below. Landing parties formed in whispers, no bugle calls, only the soft click of cutlasses. Under cover of coconut groves, pirates stalked their prey, lassoing goats with rigging line, brandishing pistols at startled hens. In 10 minutes they had over a dozen goats, 3 dozen chickens, and a single exotic parrot, whose mirror-bright plumage would grace the captain's cabin. Back on the ship, the real trial began. Fresh meat must be processed immediately, yet the hold stench still clung like a ghost. Giles ordered the abandoned sulfur-stained barrels cast overboard. Next, he rigged new casks borrowed from the island's empty sugar house. Goats were quartered, salted in coarse sea salt, mixed with crushed coral, and stowed in these fresh vessels. Chickens were plucked, spitted, and smoked over driftwood fires on the main deck. The parrot, however, presented a dilemma: to roast or to cure. They settled on gift, pinned to the captain's stateroom door with a note reading, "A token of appreciation for better taste." But triumph fermented into chaos by dusk. 1 barrel of goat meat, sealed to hastily, bulged with putrid steam. When Giles cracked its bung, a plume of rancid vapor exploded, flooding the deck with a miasma so lethal that even hardened pirates staggered. Men gagged, eyes streaming tears, knives clattering to the planks. In the panic, 3 barrels fell into the sea, releasing their cargo of oily brine. Captain Voss, coughing violently, barked orders to salvage what remained and to punish the quartermaster for his haste. Giles, head bowed, accepted a dozen lashes, 1 for each barrel lost. The following morning, delirium stalked the crew. Hunger had metamorphosed into madness. Men dreamed of meat dancing on empty plates, of hidden carcasses whispering secrets. A scrappy sailor named Braxton rallied a small faction, convinced that the cursed barrels in the bilge held secret spice that would restore their strength. They descended below deck with lanterns and cutlasses, ready to pry open any forbidden cask. Instead, they found only the rancid remains of a century-old whale carcass, so petrifying that even Braxton fled, screaming of Leviathan's curse. With spirits broken, Captain Voss turned to desperate measures. He summoned Marlowe, the ship's surgeon, and demanded an emergency lesson in island cures. Marlowe, whose medical text had rotted at the bottom of his trunk, improvised a remedy: goat fat rendered into tallow, mixed with island pepper and coconut oil, smeared over meat chunks to seal out moisture. The crew dubbed it leather stew, a greasy paste that slid down their throats with the consistency of tar, but at least stayed down. Days blurred into a haze of briny stew and fever dreams. When the lookout shouted land, it was a double-edged gift. They arrived at Kraken's Atoll, a jagged ring of coral with only brackish pools and crabs to prey upon. Shellfish became the new salvation. Pirates scraped barnacles and boiled hermit crabs in brine, then fried them in tallow. The taste was muddy, the shell shards a constant hazard, but each crunchy bite felt like victory over starvation. It was on the 4th night at Kraken's Atoll that a stranger appeared. an emaciated Vodun priest named Papa Jonga, drifting on a raft of driftwood. He claimed to possess a blessing that could purify any meat. In exchange, he demanded a barrel of coconut oil and safe passage to shore. Famine broken and desperate for a miracle, Captain Voss agreed. Papa Jonga's ritual involved chanting over the goat barrels, anointing them with a black paste of charcoal and island herbs, and burying them in the sand until the next tide rose. Skeptics snickered, but the next dawn revealed a miracle. The paste hardened into a protective casing, and the meat beneath smelled of fresh earth rather than death. With newfound hope, the crew harvested this blessed meat cautiously, slicing only small pieces at a time and testing each batch for spoilage. It tasted of smoke and salt and something indefinably sweet, like survival's elixir. Morale, long at sea's nadir, soared. Men danced on deck, sang bawdy chants to Papa Jonga, and one even proposed marriage to his smoked goat ration. By the time the Red Tempest set course for home, her hold carried cured mutton blessed by mystery and goat jerky that outlasted every mutiny. But the greatest lesson lingered. The fiercest battles in the age of sail were not won by cannon fire, but by the alchemy of survival, where science, superstition, and sheer absurdity are suited to stave off the void of hunger. In the final part, we'll witness their return, the reckoning with colonial authorities, and the legend of a feast so sumptuous it sparked the first pirate navy treaty. Hold fast. Our grotesque epic of meat preservation reaches its bloody climax next. Imagine the deck groaning under the weight of cured venison so tender it melts on your tongue, only to discover that every bite carries the bitter aftertaste of desperation and the whispered curse of men who nearly died for that morsel. Hey guys, imagine the triumphant clang of cutlery drumming against wooden platters as the crew of the Nightshade basks in culinary glory. For the first time since leaving port, they're eating meat that isn't riddled with maggots. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Their prize, barrels of venison rescued from a wrecked trader, each slab sealed in ash and kelp before burial in the sand. The Vodun priest's blessing held. No rancid gas hissed when Giles unsealed the first cask. Instead, a cool breeze carried the scent of earth and smoke. Crewmen sliced off thin strips and laid them on deck, letting the morning sun coax out smoky sweetness. The first taste brought tears to hardened eyes. No leathery resistance, no grit of sand, just pure, savory flesh that crackled as it released juices onto waiting tongues. Frenzied, they assembled a grand banquet. Casks of spiced goat jerky mingled with turtle pate, rendered in coconut oil and stiffened into elegant scoops, and aromatic bird sausages stuffed with island herbs. Flames licked iron griddles as cooks pan-fried venison medallions in rendered pig fat, seasoning each side with stolen pepper and bay leaf. Even the parrot they'd spared became the centerpiece. Roasted whole, its charred skin crackling to reveal sweet crimson meat that glowed like sunset. Men who'd once scoffed at such extravagance found themselves scraping grease from bone with their teeth, groaning in ecstatic worship. But as the feast reached its crescendo, so did the folly of gluttony. Brigantine-hardened pirates, their bellies swollen, collapsed in groaning heaps, clutching their sides. Scurvy-gnawed gums bled anew at the sight of fresh meat, as if punishing them for believing life could be simple. Surgeon Marlowe, proud of his improvised tallow cures, looked on with grim satisfaction until shouts erupted from below deck. A hidden cache of salted boar, thought spoiled weeks ago, had been resurrected by the priest's black paste. The moment Giles pried it open, a plume of phosphorescent spores burst forth, coating the sailors like spectral butterflies. Illness surged, hallucinations of crawling worms, chills that rattled bones, and delirious laughter in the dark. The priest shook his head somberly. Some things, he intoned, belong to the grave. In the madness that followed, the crew split into factions. One group demanded the spoiled boar be burned to cinders, while others attempted to cure it again, this time with a paste of lime and grated ginger stolen from the galley stores. A knife fight broke out over the last jar of peppercorns. Sparks from a falling lantern ignited spilled rum, and the deck became a hellscape of flame and shouting voices. Captain Sterling, newly returned from a delirium-induced fugue, stormed onto the deck. With a roar that shook masts, he hauled down the offending barrel and pitched it overboard. The sickened men, half blinded by smoke, stormed toward the rails, only to find the sea itself had transformed into an undulating green foam, as if the ocean rejected their sins. Stumbling back, they realized that preservation was not a one-time miracle, but a fragile bargain with nature. In the days that followed, the nightshade became a floating hospital. Marlowe concocted ginger root tea for nausea, charcoal poultices for skin rashes, and sedative brews of watercress and coconut milk to calm fevered minds. The Vodun priest, his mission of warning complete, slipped away one dawn, leaving behind only the faint scent of sage and a carved totem of driftwood. By the time they sighted land, the crew was skeleton thin, but wiser. They carried ash-blackened barrels of cured venison and cracked jars of spiced sausages, each rattle a testament to victory and caution. Stepping ashore, they formed a silent procession, each man cradling his ration like a newborn child. On the docks, colonial officials gaped, not at the treasure chests or cannon, but at the sight of 15 men carrying meat barrels as sacred reliquaries. Word spread fast. The nightshade returned with more provisions than any fleet. Governors clamored for samples, surgeons begged for tallow recipes, and commercial butchers clamored to invent priests' paste cures. A treaty was inked. The pirates would exchange their ash and kelp process and herbal cures for safe passage through colonial waters and medical supplies. Thus was born the first documented pirate navy culinary accord. In the end, meat preservation without refrigeration proved to be as much an art of politics and psychology as chemistry. A barrel of venison could unite sworn enemies, drive men to the brink of madness, and reshape alliances when wielded with skill or misused through greed. The Nightshade's odyssey ended not with cannon smoke, but with the savory smoke of cured flesh, and the quiet knowledge that survival demands both invention and humility. So next time you bite into a tender prosciutto or twirl a slice of jerky between your fingers, remember the absurd lengths to which pirates went, sacrificing blood, sanity, and superstition to keep meat from spoiling. Their nightmare at sea became our delicacy on land, a reminder that behind every savory morsel lies a tale of desperation, daring, and a pinch of salt. Stomach growling louder than the captain's cannon, no bread, no meat, no hope. Your only options? Seaweed stew, shark eyes, or the occasional rat kebab. Welcome to the pirate nightmare. When provisions vanish, desperation becomes dinner. Hey guys, more hardtack, no salted pork, just empty barrels and the mocking howl of the wind. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Part 1. The Descent into Culinary Despair. When a pirate ship's supplies dwindled to dust, the crew faced two choices, starve or improvise, and desperation drove them to culinary extremes. Here's how swashbucklers kept their stomachs from turning on them. Fish offal and shark libations. With prized cuts long gone, pirates turned to the sea's underbelly. Fish heads, entrails, and slimy gills, once discarded, became the backbone of the famine feast. Boiled in brackish water with a sprig of seagrass, the broth was foul enough to make a gull swoon, but its gelatinous richness was enough to choke down. When sharks circled the hull, they were harpooned, gutted on deck, and their livers drained to brew a rancid but vitamin-rich oil that sailors dubbed seaweed wine. One gulp, and your insides danced with phosphorus fire. No scurvy, but near certain. Days of agony. Rat and rook rations. No pantry meant no pest control, and rats flourished in the shadows. Pirates, ever resourceful, captured them by tying meat scraps to rigging ropes, as bait and trap in one. Skinning the rodents was an unpleasant art. Men would sing bawdy shanties to steal their nerves, while scraping fur with broken knives. Fried in hot fat salvaged from old bacon barrels. Rat kebabs sizzled into morsels that, against all reason, tasted of chicken's poor cousin. The worst part? Starving rook pigeons became backup, plucked, spitted, and roasted for the occasional festive, if tragic, banquet. Seaweed stew and algae oatmeal. When the deck reeked of salt and rot, pirates scoured the hull for seaweed beds trailing beneath the ship. Types mattered, kelp dissolved into slimy slime, while dulse added a chewy umami kick. Boiled with crushed hardtack crumbs and seasoned with stolen pepper shavings, the resulting porridge stretched meager flour rations for days. Some crew claimed a hint of the abyss in every spoonful, but belly beats trumped horror every time. Barnacles and mussel mines. Every barnacle scraper on board doubled as a forager's tool. Pirates scraped the crusts from the hull, boiling the clusters in salt water to dislodge little neck clams and mussels. The shells popped open with a satisfying crackle, each drop of brackish juice a testament to survival. However, mussel mines bore risk. Eat a poisoned bivalve, and you'd be left dancing in delirium as black water spilled from your lips. Part 1 ends here, but the nightmare deepens. Next, we'll explore how pirates turned driftwood ash into pseudo-grits, feasted on insects in the rigging, and even gnawed on leather belts before the promise of a fresh raid glimmered on the horizon. Stay tuned for part 2 of our gruesome saga of starvation and ingenuity. As the last gill of seaweed stew slid down your throat, the Crimson Corsair's crew discovered new depths of desperation. Empty barrels meant empty bellies, and they turned to methods so absurd you'd swear they were invented by Davy Jones himself. First came the driftwood grits. Under the mainmast, men collected charred ash from burnt rigging. Fine gray dust they sifted through torn sailcloth, mixed with the tiniest scrap of hardtack crumbs and boiled in murky bilge water. The grits formed a thick paste that felt like swallowing mortar. Yet, trembling hands scooped it greedily, convinced each spoonful was a ticket away from starvation's jaws. Next, the rigging's insect harvest. Spiders, beetles, and plump moth larvae clung to ropes and canvas folds. Quartermaster Briggs rigged a swinging net of sail fibers to trap them during night watches. By dawn, the net bulged with a twitching carnival of exoskeletons, blanched in freshwater spoils, and yes, some dared to boil in last drops of rum. The insects became crunchy protein bombs. The bravest chewed them whole, holding their noses as taste buds betrayed them with a bitter aftertaste. When insects lost appeal, leather belts entered the menu. Captains confiscated every strap and spur, ordering sailmakers to cut discarded scraps into thin strips. These were boiled in seawater with a handful of lime juice when available. Lime juice, yielding a chewy substitute so tough it required calloused jaws. Rumor spread that a few men nearly cracked their teeth on a stubborn belt fiber, only to swallow triumphantly and declare, better than dying. Even the ship's woodwork saw culinary service. Small shavings from the figurehead and rail planking were soaked overnight in vinegar-stained buckets. Strainers of torn sailcloth caught the pulp, which sailors mixed with fish oil to create a sludgy wood porridge. One taste and most vomited, but hunger won the vote each time. As madness crept in, superstition returned. Sailors whispered of the hunger spirit, a phantom believed to feast on flesh before men could. To appease it, they offered empty cups at midnight watch, chanting old sea chants until voices cracked. When nothing changed, they blamed any sudden rat disappearance on the spirit's appetite and cheered. The rats at least had died eating something real. The only salvation on the horizon was the promise of a fresh raid. Scouts peered tirelessly for uncharted islets or merchant sails. Each spurt of distant sailcloth ignited hope. Tomorrow, goat stew. Day after, turtle meat. Until then, they endured the cruel trinity of driftwood grits, insect larvae, and leather jerky, meals so grotesque that even sharks gave them wide berth. In part 3, we'll plunge deeper into horror, scuttling for plankton blooms, feasting on seabird guano algae, and the moment a single coconut washed aboard, sending the crew into frenzied delirium. Stay ready, because when supplies run out, pirates learn the ocean's worst feast is yet to come. When the horizon remained stubbornly empty, the crew of the Black Marauder descended further into lunacy and deeper into the ocean's most unwelcome buffet. First light revealed a thin green scum blooming across the water, plankton swirls so dense they darkened the ship's shadow. Desperation drove sailors to lower buckets to scoop the glistening mass, then pour it into barrels lined with torn sailcloth. The result was a gloopy slurry that stained mouths neon and smelled of rotten seafoam. Yet its microscopic protein kicked fatigue in the teeth, and men gulped it down by the quart, tongues tingling with iodine burn, believing each mouthful might be the difference between life and oblivion. Next came the guano gardens. High on the yardarms, pirate scavengers pried away crusted seabird droppings, white, odorous, and laced with nutrients from 1,000 beaks. Back on deck, they soaked the flakes in brackish water until a slimy paste formed, then stirred in shards of hardtack for texture. The guano gruel earned shrieks of disgust but sustained bones that threatened to buckle under hunger's weight. Some claimed it cleared their bowels in miraculous fashion. Others swore they saw specters drifting through the paste's whitish mists. A single coconut bobbing alongside the hull sparked pure delirium, a golden salvation offering both water and flesh. Pirates fought like starved wolves to haul it aboard, prying it open with rusty cutlasses. The sweet liquid poured into tin cups, reviving men who'd stooped to chew on tar-stained rope. Coconut meat was sliced into slivers, peeled and pressed between cheeks like ivory chips. For a moment, the deck pulsated with laughter and tears, proof that even the smallest gift from the sea could reignite hope. But coconut supply proved fleeting. As shells dwindled, sailors turned to shellfish sprawl. Horseshoe crabs dragged up from shallow reefs, their blue blood staining buckets. Boiled until their shells cracked, they released spongy innards that smelled of brine and wet earth. Quartermaster Jolene served them with a side of seaweed crumbs, dubbing the mess reef stew. Those who survived swore the taste was like a distant memory of rain, but the gamble often ended in fevered vomiting, and sometimes in mad visions of leviathans rising to reclaim their kin. With every oddity consumed, pirates grew bolder. One night, in a fit of blind appetite, they harvested stinging jellyfish drifting against the hull. Stripped of tentacles, blanched in lime water, and fried in coconut oil, the translucent discs crackled like neon chips. The first bite ignited mouths with electric sting, and men danced on the deck, convinced they'd discovered the sea's final fury. Only the next morning, as scurvy shadows crept across their gums, did they realize the jellyfish feast had delivered a potent dewatering curse. Thirst returned tenfold. As cravings intensified, superstition surged anew. Pirates constructed a makeshift altar at the bow. Shells, bones, and a single rusted cutlass offered to the sea god of empty belly. They chanted ancient lines stolen from a ship's chaplain's missal, beseeching relief in any form. On the 7th night, a sudden squall swept the deck, drenching barrels of plankton broth and turning guano paste into stinking clay. Some saw this as divine wrath, others hailed it as baptism, washing away sin before salvation arrived. By the end of Part 3, the crew had eaten so many horrors that their nightmares featured dancing mussels and whispering barnacles. Yet each grotesque meal carried them nearer to landfall or to the abyss. In the final part, we'll witness the moment supplies miraculously replenish, and how pirates, having tasted starvation's depths, treat fresh provisions as both blessing and curse. Stay on deck. Our last chapter of Starvation's nightmare is just beyond the horizon. At dawn on the 42nd day, the lookout's cry cracked like a pistol. Land ho! Weak bones and hollow eyes leveled toward the green swirl on the horizon. Sable Isle, rumored to burst with fruit and game. Bones rattled as the crew scrambled below decks, prying open barrels of plankton soup and guano gruel for one last repulsive meal. They swallowed the sludge with trembling lips, eyes alive with the promise of fresh blood in their veins. Longboats hit the beach like wounded beasts, sand squished beneath bare feet long unsoftened by land. The first raid was chaotic. Sabers flashed as mangrove crabs the size of dinner plates skittered underfoot, plucked and roasted over driftwood bonfires. Their claws cracked with satisfying pops. Sweet flesh released smoky steam that tasted of home. Clutching crab halves, pirates howled in triumph. They were alive. Next came the grove of sour oranges. Captain Rourke marched through the trees, tearing fruit with clawed hands and tossing halves to the crew. Juice gushed down parched throats, burning like fire but waking senses dulled by weeks of rot. Some wept at the acid's kiss, others spat it out, convinced it too good to be real. Yet each drop chased away delirium, reminding them of a world beyond hollow hunger. Fresh meat demanded fresh methods. Wild hogs rooted in the underbrush, chased with bayonet pikes and strung up like trophies. Braves among the crew hacked at loins with rusty blades, savoring the rich aroma unleashed by heat. Cured fish, once the height of disgust, were forgotten as sizzling pork crackled on spits. Each slice released juices that gleamed gold in the sun, and for the first time in a month, bellies rumbled not in protest, but in eager anticipation. But bliss turned to chaos. Gluttony overpowered discipline. Men gorged themselves on citrus and pork, neglecting to save any for rations back on the ship. Drunken laughter spiraled into bar fights beneath banana trees. Stolen orange wedges sparked blade duels. Rum recovered from hidden caches vanished in a single night of jubilation. Soon, the shore camp descended into drunken brawls and delirious joy. When the tide rose next morning, the longboats creaked under the weight of pig carcasses but cockled in patches of rotted fruit and bone shards. Scurvy, once a relentless predator, retreated, only to be replaced by fevers and food poisoning from overripe oranges and undercooked crab. Surgeon Malden's tent overflowed with trembling men, faces green and anguished. Fresh never guaranteed safe. One too many gluttonous bites invited fresh nightmares. Forced back to their ship, the crew carried both bounty and burden. Hold space stuffed with crates of cured crab and salted pork, but also with half-eaten oranges rotting in the humid air. The first swell sent spoiled fruit tumbling into bilges, fouling water casks. Fresh pork spoiled under the sun's heat, maggots breeding in hidden crevices. Fear whispered that the island's cure came with its own curse. The moment of surplus triggered new crises jarring as any famine. As they weighed anchor, Captain Rourke issued strict orders. 1 orange wedge per man per day, pork rationed to slivers, and every barrel sealed airtight with beeswax scavenged ashore. A council of quartermasters and Surgeon Malden enforced these rules with merciless precision. Any man caught hoarding fruit or overindulging faced marooning on the first uninhabited isle. Hunger had taught them that survival demanded balance, not binge. In the weeks that followed, the nightmare of starvation lingered in every mouthful of fresh food. Pirates chewed slowly, eyes wary of sweetness. They sang low shanties of rancid broths and tar-soaked hardtack, reminding themselves how close they'd come to oblivion. Each ration became a sacred gift, measured with trembling hand, proof that scarcity had etched itself into their bones. By the time the ship limped into port, the crew was gaunt but eternally changed. Governors and tavern keepers eyed their cargo with envy, barrels of island pork and hollowed citrus now exotic commodities. Yet the pirates traded them sparingly, knowing that hunger returns the moment you forget its sting. They marched ashore, bellies full but hearts vigilant, carrying the cruel lesson that when supplies run out, the ocean's feast is only the prelude to its famine.